Good evening and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. And today's guest brings a depth of spirituality that is not learned, but lived. So, Julie Cluff is a spiritual teacher, psychic medium, a grief specialist whose path was profoundly shaped after the loss of her two youngest children in a tragic accident in 2007. And from that experience, she awakened to an enduring awareness of spiritual presence and connection beyond death, something that now guides her work. With a heart centered and grounded approach, Julie supports others navigating grief, spiritual awakening, and purpose, bridging the mystical with the practical through her programs, teaching, and podcast. So please join me in welcoming Julie Cluff to The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. Welcome, Julie.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited about the conversation we're going to have today.
I'm so excited to have you here. And I will we're gonna just deep dive. We're gonna deep dive and go right into it because many people have this preconception about death. And I want to go into your grief and the possibilities of having that conversation.
Yeah.
Recapitulation, resolving one's issues with the fact that somebody is passing away, somebody is on the brink of leaving, or somebody was taken from us unexpectedly. You lost your children, and
I
I'm
did.
so sorry. And to turn that pain into something that is productive is phenomenal. So my hat's off to you. Can you
Thank
bring us right there? Bring us to how one experiences trauma and shifts it to something so positive as the way that you did.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. I want to start with the fact that years before this accident happened, I had lost my brother to suicide, and within a couple years after that, went through a very um a very eventful divorce. I think they all are pretty eventful, right? But, a lot of questions around life and living and loss and so on and so forth. And I had remarried. I had three children from my first marriage, three children from my second marriage. We were raising this, six kids, this Brady Bunch together. And then on Mother's Day in 2007, I was traveling with my three youngest children. The three older ones had work and other obligations and weren't with me, but we were traveling from Houston, Texas, where I was living east to visit grandparents. And in the middle of the afternoon, as I was approaching the border of Alabama and Mississippi, I fell asleep at the wheel. And what's really crazy about that is that I never felt tired that day. I didn't feel tired. It felt like we were having a lively conversation, and then suddenly we all fell asleep, and then the car was rolling. It was pretty crazy. I woke up and we were bouncing in between the eastbound and westbound lanes of highway. And when I tried to bring my SUV back up on the two lanes of highway heading east, the car, the wheels just lifted off and we started to roll. And when I came to, I didn't have a lot of eyesight. I didn't have any eyesight initially. Like I could hear my son James, who was 12 at the time, and in the seat next to me in the front, and I could hear him crying and, upset. But as I was calling for my daughter Carrie, who was 10, and my son David, who was 8, who had been in the back seat, when I was calling for them, there was no answer. And as my eyesight returned and I saw the destruction around me, and that's when I noticed that they had been thrown from the car. And they were what I describe as a football field away. It felt like I don't even know how far away they were, but it just felt like they were so far away from me. And I saw all these people gathering in the field. And it wasn't until later when I realized that there was no, there were not like, there would have had to have been a dozen cars on the side of the road for there to be so many people out there. And it was later that I realized those weren't people. There were a couple of people, but they were spirits, they were angels, they were presences from the other dimension. And having, later my memories came forward that I was actually taken into the other realm during this process of rolling when I was knocked out, and that wasn't apparent to me right away. I think that when we have these types of experiences, it takes us time to understand what happened and to unpack it all. There were things that I was very well aware of in the moment and stayed with me, and there were other things that came to my attention after. But while the car was rolling, I heard a voice in my head that told me to bring my arm in. I don't know how, but somehow I listened and I brought my arm in. And it wasn't long after that that I learned of a woman who had lost her arm in a rollover car accident. And a couple years later, I met another woman who lost her arm in a rollover car accident. So, while it was part of my life plan, part of my family's plan, part of our community's plan that, my children passed away that day. My youngest two, Carrie again, who was 10, and David, who was 8. It wasn't in my plan to lose my arm. So it's really fascinating. That voice that I heard was calm, it was peaceful. Nothing about that situation was calm or peaceful. But when I reflect on that voice, and any time that I've heard spirit speak to me in that way, it's always been calm and peaceful, regardless of the circumstances. So I always like to share that aspect of that kind of communication. Yeah, my son, my 12-year-old son and I ended up at one hospital, and my younger children ended up at a different hospital. Like I said, I never saw them again alive in this life. And my 12-year-old son needed emergency surgery on his leg, and it just miraculously, I don't think there's any accidents, but the doctor who had actually developed the procedure that he needed was at the hospital that day and performed that surgery for my son. And this surgeon was absolutely an earth angel for our family. He advocated for us. Not only did he perform this surgery, but he was an advocate for our family during this really, really challenging time. But yeah, there was just so many miracles that happened around this very tragic event that I eventually wrote a book called Miracles in the Darkness. And at the time that I wrote that book, I was very entrenched in religion still, and I was defining all my experiences through my religious lens, and eventually that lens became too narrow, too, it couldn't hold everything that I had experienced and was experiencing. And once I took that lens off, not that again, like that was a beautiful experience for me to be involved in religion and to have that spiritual background that brought me a lot of comfort and a lot of comfort from the community, comfort from doctrine in some cases, and so forth. It also brought a lot of conditioning that I brought to my complicated grief, my complex grief that I experienced after the loss of my children. I was dealing with PTSD. Yeah, there was a lot of beauty in the experience, and there was a lot of pain to move through.
So I would love to just unpack a couple of different things that I heard. And I would really love to elaborate on that because I had a near-death experience at 12 years old, and I was out on the beach and we were jumping over the waves, and the waves were like 5 or 6 foot tall. It was Jones Beach out on Long Island, and there I was holding hands with everyone with this false sense of security, thinking I could jump over the waves. And then I decided I had to go to the bathroom, and so I was going to leave. So, as a 12-year-old, not thinking, what did I do? I turned my back on the wave. And of course, it was an anomaly wave. It was way over my head, came crashing down over me. I was separated. I tumbled and went to get my breath and try to get my footing when the wave was crashing. Another one was over my head. And then
Mm.
I tried to get my footing again, and another one was over my head. And that calm voice that you talked about said, "Are you ready?" And I said, "Okay, God, if she's going to take me, if the water's going to take me, I'm ready." And I went to go and breathe in that whole lung full of water, and it felt like I was being dragged out into the ocean and I was gone. They said, "Okay." And so it will. And what happens? I washed on to the shore.
Wow. Wow.
And so when you talk about that voice, that calm, serene voice that's just literally talking to you, because I was asking, is this it? Am I going to die now? Is it over? Because I couldn't get my breath.
Mm.
And
And the panic and everything that goes with that. And yet this voice is so calm,
um,
soothing, and comforting. Yeah.
yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to share with you also is that I was in a car accident, 3 months pregnant. Our oldest was 2 years old, and we rolled. And it is the most, so because we were on black ice. I'll never forget this, going from upstate, going from downstate New York to upstate New York. And we just spun out, hit the median, and rolled over about 4 times. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I learned about not having so many free things in the car, things that weren't tied down or bound down, because everything was just smacking us in the head and everything. And it was just, again, surreal in
Yeah.
the respect that the time slows down to nothing, and all I could remember is my oldest son basically going, "I don't like it when the car falls down."
Mm.
God, thank you. We weren't hurt, but the experience of that, the experience of just, there's no control, that all you can do is just surrender to the
Mm-hmm.
moment. So these things happen to us, and it shifts sometimes our outlook on death. Many people go to fear. I'm one of those people, I don't go to fear. I would remember talking to a woman who had passed away, and she came back and she said, she said to me, because I had a lot of guilt. My mom had passed away very, very spontaneously. And I was like, I wasn't there. And she said, "You weren't supposed to be there." And I'm like, "How could you know I wasn't supposed to be there?" She said, "Because it's not your decision. Because many people are very selfish, and they only think about them when somebody else is passing away. But when the person themselves are actually passing away, if they don't want you there, they will wait even that split second for you to turn their head and leave while your head is turned, or while you're going out for that drink, or while you just get up to go to the bathroom, because
Yes.
it's their choice. It is not our choice. And many people don't actually come to the conclusion that it's not about them. It's about the person who is passing, and that the sign is they're not crazy when one foot is in the real world and one foot is in the spiritual world. That they are now, what's the word I want to use? They are now circumventing the bridge. They've
Mm-hmm.
created the bridge, and they have both feet in each world. And that we have to stop this thing that we have selfishly of like, "Oh, she's talking crazy. Oh, he's talking crazy." But that this is taking place. Prepare yourself and stop thinking selfishly about what it does to you, and help them to have a healthy transition. What are your
Mm-hmm.
thoughts about that?
Oh yeah, 100%. That we think we have so much control, and when we're going through a grief process, a heightened emotion creates memory. And so when someone passes, we have a heightened emotion. And so we tend to have a very sticky a sticky memory in that spot. And when we work through the emotions of that experience of losing someone, of letting go of the idea we should have been there, it should have been different, all the circumstances that we have to work through. When we work through those circumstances and we work through our humanness of grief and the suddenness, sometimes the shocking suddenness of a loss, or even, when somebody has been ill for a long time and then they die, there's a process that we go through. There's a process of grief that we go through where we have to become accustomed to the idea that they're no longer here. But what we do as humans, a lot of times in that transition, is we stay stuck in that memory. So
Mm.
our consciousness, instead of being present where we are right now, our consciousness is in that memory. And we stay stuck in that memory, and we struggle to move forward through life, and we struggle to re-examine and re-establish a relationship with that person who has transitioned, because we no longer, all our memories. Okay, so let me share this concept with you. So we tend to think of time as like now, past, present, right? But really everything is happening right now. And if we look at it, and the reason I'm doing this is because the image that they've given me, and I have a couple images, but this is the easiest one to think about, is like a pond. Like if we have a round pond, and when you drip something into the middle of water, right, it ripples out. So the larger the drip, the bigger the ripple, right?
Right.
And so in the present moment, we are having experiences. So whether our experiences in this present moment are reliving a past memory and reliving it from that agony of loss, or if our present experience is of healing and of processing, but everything we do in the present moment is rippling out into all directions. So if you were to have talked to me a week after the accident, a month after the accident, I would have told you a totally different story.
Right.
Like the circumstances would have been the same, but my emotions and my relationship to those circumstances are very different now than they were then. So what we're doing in the moment, so all the work that I did after the accident of being physically active, because what's good for the body is good for the soul, is good for the mental, is good for the spiritual. Um, of going to therapy and working through the PTSD and the complicated grief, all the like the shame and the guilt and you know, the self-hatred that I felt. All of that was present in those 3 years of healing. And at the 3 year mark, I had some very distinct experiences. And one was that I ended up at Stonehenge. And it
Mm.
was a complete fluke that I ended up there, which sounds crazy because I'm in the States. It's like, it's not a fluke that you end up at Stonehenge. You got on a plane and stuff. But the circumstances that got me there were pretty unusual.
Okay.
And so I ended up at Stonehenge, and then about a week later, I was offered a prayer, a special prayer from someone in my congregation back home, and within 24 hours of that, the lights came on. That began like that was the culmination of the awakening that began at the accident. So one thing that I didn't share with you while I laid in the hospital and I was on a striker board because they were testing and, making sure I didn't have any internal things going on that they needed to address. I had very minor injuries. I had a sprained shoulder and a minor fracture to my wrist. Those were my physical injuries. But while I laid there in the hospital, in complete freak out, in complete like, I mean, when I came to, I was screaming, I killed my kids, I killed my kids, I killed my kids. Like that was my mental state. It was just this agony. But while I laid in the hospital, I had these experiences where, and I don't know exactly how to explain it, but later when memories came of being above the accident in spirit during that space when I was unconscious, being above the accident with my two children. And I don't have memories of what was said or what was done. It's just more of like just this acknowledgement that this was the plan. But while I laid in the hospital in this freaked out mode, in all the chaos of an emergency room, Jesus came to me, Yeshua. I call him Yeshua now to distinguish between the religious version of Jesus that I learned versus the Yeshua that I have a relationship with now. But he came to me and brought me to another place, brought me to a beautiful space filled with wildflowers, like we were standing in a field. He was holding my hands. He was eye to eye with me. And there was, again, there's no words to express what that felt like, but I was held in that space with love and comfort. But then I would come to, I would like come out of that experience and be back in the chaos. So the best way that I've been able to explain that experience is it's as if you're sitting in an immersive theater where there's a war scene and then suddenly it goes to this beautiful love story.
Mm.
And then you go back to this war scene. Like it's just that shocking and that sudden. Um, but yeah, I had this interaction with Yeshua and these moments of spirit communication over those 3 years where I was given insights that I couldn't assimilate yet, that I couldn't, it took like what I realized long after was everything I needed for healing was available to me in the moment of the experience. But in my humanness, I also needed time to assimilate those things.
So I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to ask two things. One is that did you want to come back after experience Yeshua? Because many of us don't want to come back once
No,
we understand what bliss feels like. And then the second thing,
certainly didn't want to come back to the circumstances that I was coming back to.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But not only that, not even wanting to come back to the humanness. Because many of us cannot separate the two. And there are those of us who can. And to transcend the humanness is to understand this. It's like saying the rule is there are no rules,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We transcend the humanness. We understand we have to have this experience, this pain, this trauma, these emotions, the free will to navigate through the emotions and all of the aspects that that surround us because we have to deal with the day to day. But when you're able to have that moment when you can transcend the humanness and just kind of look at it in its entirety to go, okay, I have to go back.
Hmm.
Because in the end, you are love. We are love. We are light. We are our truth,
Yeah.
right? And then we take that energy, that spirit, that light that is us, and then we come back and we navigate
Yeah.
and we experience and we go through the trauma. And so understanding this and knowing this, I would imagine, yes, it is hard to come back, not even just to the trauma, just to the humanness. And then knowing that, what was your sole purpose and how did it shift to what it is?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question because I was receiving, well, let me just give you a for instance, at the five month mark, I walked into a drugstore and I saw a costume. They were hanging Halloween costumes up, and I saw a costume and I immediately thought of my daughter Carrie. And then of course immediately I was slammed with the realization that there would be no Halloween for her that year. And in my head I said, why did this have to happen? Like, that anguish, again, that anguish, the pain, the self-hatred, like everything, like all of that was just, pounding on me. And in that moment, I heard that peaceful voice again that said, they're right where they're supposed to be. And when I heard that voice, I answered with, well, why did it have to happen this way? And then the voice came back and said, how would you have liked it to happen? Now, there's no good answer to that.
Right.
But there were a few of those particular incidences where spirit was able to come through the shell of grief, the shell of self-hatred, this shell of guilt and shame, and communicate with me. And then after that 3 year mark, I I went through a couple of years of trying to, like, I'm okay, but I don't know how to live my life now. Like, everything that I was doing before was no longer my plan. And we ended up moving about a year later after, after I had this awakening. And when we moved, again, I was like in this space of rebuilding my life again. And as I was rebuilding my life and I was going through another bout of self-doubt and depression, but not like what I had dealt with during those 3 years. And I heard the spirit whispered to me again and said, you don't have to worry. You are not going to go back to the place that you were before, because I started to panic. I was panicking. But I was having these moments where spirit was whispering to me, you're supposed to do something with this. Now, keep in mind, this accident happened on Mother's Day. I
Mm.
lost two children. I had this miraculous awakening, this miraculous healing experience. And I was receiving this message that I was supposed to share my story and that I was supposed to do something with this. Not a lot of detail about what that was. And I dismissed it every time it came in. Every time that thought came in, I dismissed that idea. And I kept thinking, that's crazy. Nobody wants to hear my story. That makes no sense. Like all those thoughts, right? Well, at about 5.5 years later, after the accident, 5.5 years after the accident, I was introduced to this man at a lunch, and he had gone through some really hard things in his life, and he was currently working with people. He had overcome his challenges, and he was currently working with people who were dealing with the same challenges that he had. And in that process of that lunch, my mom turned to me and said, Julie, tell them your story. And I like, ooh, like that, feeling of, oh my gosh, like I don't want to. And there were a few reasons, and I don't typically share this, but I feel to share this. There were a few reasons why I didn't typically share my story. One is it was so shocking for people. It was so hard
Yeah.
for people to hear the story. And that was hard on me to create that shock and that, and to know how to navigate that. And I just wasn't used to telling my story. I just wasn't comfortable. And so I did, I like begrudgingly shared a bit of what had happened and the miraculous healing that I experienced and so forth. But as we were leaving the restaurant that day, that man stopped me and he put his hand on my arm and he said, "You're supposed to do something with this." Boy, the tears are coming as I
Yes.
share that with you because it was like a lightning bolt in that
Yeah.
moment. And it was like, we haven't been able to get to you directly, so we're going to send that message through someone else. And so you can feel it. And in that moment, I knew that I was supposed to do something with this. There's a reason I'm still here. I could have died in that accident just like my kids did. There's a reason that you're still here. There's a reason that anybody who is listening to this and will listen to it in the future, there's a reason that you're here.
Yes.
And whether that reason has to do with feeding your cat or sharing a story, there's a reason you are still here. And I knew in that moment that I needed to find that path. And it took a little bit for me to be guided into this space of and my first foot into it was becoming a coach a couple of years after that, and then doing the grief work that I did and developing the grief program that I developed. And in the process of all this, I was learning to communicate with my children. I was learning to communicate with my brother. I was developing a grief healing program that I taught to many, many people. And I worked with clients and I worked with other people who wanted to help people in grief and taught them this model of healing and those aspects of things. But in the process of all that, I again was learning to communicate with my children. When I was working with clients, I would feel their loved ones in the room. I would often feel their messages for their loved ones. I didn't know how to communicate that. So, we all know how to walk, but we don't all know how to play basketball, right? And
Yes.
so, basketball is a learned experience. And mediumship, spirit communication is a learned experience. Like we all have the ability to communicate and to connect with spirit, but it's a learned experience too. And if I was going to work with the public in this learned experience, I needed more skills and I needed more understanding of what I was experiencing. Channeling came in. I began to channel the angelic realm, a group that calls themselves the Council of Wisdom.
Mhm.
All of this began to occur, and eventually I actually sold off my grief healing program to someone else to do that training and to carry forward the mission of Build a Life After Loss, and moved into this space of spirit communication and bringing through guidance for people and bringing through loved ones for people. And a lot of times, I have both of those types of sessions on my website, and a lot of times those sessions merge into each other. The mediumship reading turns into a spirit reading where their guides are wanting to communicate with them as well, and vice versa, where a guidance session, their spirit team is communicating with them, and then their loved ones begin to show up. But all of this is done through the avenue of love.
I love it. I
Yeah.
absolutely love it. So, in understanding that the whole world opened up for you and understanding that mediumship and channeling came through. By the way, I want you to know I truly understand where you're coming from. I remember the very first time I had a reading, and like you said, we all have our gifts, but we just don't always exercise it. Um, it was a beautiful woman. Her name was Angela. I can see her face right now. And I was with a group of women. We were in Angelica, New York. And she couldn't take her eyes off me when I had asked her to take a picture of the group. We were just hanging out for the weekend, bunch of moms and, women who work corporate and, just getting a weekend away. And finally, when she went to share her evening, because I didn't know at the time that she was the guest for the evening. She was going to channel and tell us about mediumship and everything else. And she was still staring at me. And she turned around. She was like, "You have an entourage around you. I'm going to work with you first." And she was the person who told me that my mom, the sisters, they said to keep my singing. They said all these messages that she brought forward, and she changed my life from that moment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Changed my life so fully that she said that I wasn't open enough and they were trying to communicate with me, and I need to open myself more. So what did I do? The first thing I did, I started reading, 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 reading. Just you are how to read your aura, your spirit guide, you are open, you are just any way to open myself up. But
Yeah.
what I found what it was to seek that heart and that moment of traversing my inner verse, going inside, not external to myself, but inside and really allowing that connection to take place. And I guess I'm talking through the iterations because I'm quite sure that many people hear that same message, that they're not open enough, that the loved ones are trying to share with them the beauty and the love and the beautiful messages that can be shared to our side of the realm, but we're so busy distracted and in a world that is exercising distraction more than ever right now.
Mm-hmm.
What would you suggest to that person who needs to be more open? What would you suggest to allow that heart to be open so that messages can be received?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. One of the things that it was for me, and I didn't even realize that I had been essentially like spirit was speaking to me all the time, and I was journaling and I would ask questions and then I would write answers. I didn't realize how I was already channeling.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly in a training that I was in, I was working, practicing with somebody, and suddenly words were coming out of my mouth before they were going through my consciousness. And I thought, what is that? And then, and that developed into vocal channeling and developed into, that experience of being connected to that realm and understanding that. So it opens up in phases. And so that's what I want to share is that when you're writing, when you're journaling, you are you are essentially channeling. So when you start asking questions in your journals, be very intentional about the questions you're asking. And then you're listening and you're writing, you are essentially connecting. So, in the same way, you can do this with a loved one that's on the other side. For example, my son David, I could write a note to my son David and say, "Hey, David, we love sharing David's stories, and I'll just share some things with him, and then I'll write, Dear Mom." And then he communicates with me. And a
Mm.
lot of times when we're doing these practices, whether it's we're connecting with our spirit guides, our angelic field, um, whether we're connecting with that, whether we're connecting with a specific person, I sometimes connect directly with Yeshua. I sometimes connect with Abraham Lincoln, believe it or not. Like he's one of the people I sometimes connect with. Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was the developer of the 5 stages of grief. So we can set our antenna to connect with a certain group. But a lot of times when we're writing what we're sensing and hearing, and this is a practice, when you first start it, you might get a word or two. versus a paragraph,
Right.
you know, versus a page versus several pages, right? When we're in this practice, we are setting our antenna to what we're intending, who we're intending to communicate with, and we are practicing that communication. So, sitting quietly with ourselves, just pondering, just staring at a wall, just being quiet, being centered, bringing our attention to our heart center. That is, over and over and over, I've been drawn to the heart center. This is where we are connected to our eternal soul, where we are connected to all that is. We are connected to the divine. We are connected to the earth. And those are all practices that we can do. But as we're learning, we're experimenting. We're experimenting and we're having fun with it and we're holding
Yes.
it lightly. And
Yes.
it's not, if you're, if someone's listening to this right now and they're in heavy grief, don't expect that you're going to be able to write a note and receive these big downloads because your grief, you're carrying this shell of grief. And there's the grief is there for a purpose. It is part of the healing journey. It's there to slow us down. It's just like it's part of our nervous system. It's just like when we go out on a run and we break our ankle, we stop because there's pain. Imagine if there wasn't pain and we just kept running on the ankle. So
Yeah.
the grief is the pain that's associated with the separation. It's associated with the loss of whatever it is, whether it's a person or an event or a thing, whatever that loss is. The grief is part of the healing process. So as you communicate from a space of grief, you communicate with the knowing that you're being heard, but you may not have the receiver available to you in that moment.
And as you're saying this, one of the things that they're making sure that I bring is that all of this is about trusting yourself,
Mm-hmm.
trusting self in the writing, trusting self in what you are hearing. Sometimes we are so distracted with, well, who did it come from? How did it come through? Where did it come from? Is it positive? Is it negative? Oh my God, what if it's not the right person? What if it's not the right thing? What I wrote, oh, it's so negative. Oh, blah, blah, blah. And we have this chatter.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when someone comes through or when something is channeled, you have to trust the process by which you're experiencing. So, and I love the fact that you talk about the writing. And, I want to reserve the right to invite you back because we didn't even get a chance to get into your book. But it is so important what you said because I've had channeled through, I've woken up in the middle of the night, written words down. I came back in the morning to look at what I wrote, and I channeled a whole complete poem
Mm-hmm.
mid, like 12th century Gothic like poem. The language that I was using was like, no, this is not modern day language. It came through me, but because I was an open channel enough to be able to just write the words down without judging them, without being distracted on where they're coming from, if they were positive or negative, blah, 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 blah. It came through, you know. As an author, you as an author, the words flow through me.
Mm-hmm.
They don't flow from me. And so that which the other side wants to express to humanity comes through if
Mm-hmm.
you allow it and you afford it. So I can't highlight enough not only what you said in terms of the practices, but to also emphasize to trust yourself as you're going through the process, and that however it comes through, like you said, one word, two words, a paragraph, a flow, a complete, no matter what gift you are exercising, trust yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. That is a big component of it is the trust and beginning to be aware of subtle energy.
Mm,
Beginning to be aware of these subtle nudges. I have experiences today where I can't even remember what happened the other day, but it happened again where um I wish I could think of a specific example, which is not coming to me right now, but where I will, feel like, oh, I should have checked on that. And then I didn't. And then afterwards, I was like, oh, I really should have checked on that.
Click on that
You know,
because they told you.
yeah, yeah. And I just wasn't as attuned in that moment to the subtle energy. Like when I'm working with a client, I'm like so dialed in, and all the little subtle energies I'm just dialed into because I know it's for that person. But when we're living our day-to-day life, it's a little harder because it's like, we're distracted by our things. We're distracted by the phone. We're distracted by, our appointments. We're distracted by needing to get somewhere. I've gotten into the habit recently of not even turning a podcast, music, or anything on while I'm driving, just
Right.
because I have that quiet space. And I'm just like, I want to quiet my life a little bit. And sometimes removing all the outside, the programming that we're so used to plugging into, whether that's a TV program or a movie or news or a podcast or music. A lot of those things can be super beneficial, but on a constant drive, like we wake up in the morning, we turn on the TV and we leave it running all day long, that's not useful to our spiritual development. Our spirit needs space. And we are literally right now, in this moment, building the new earth.
Yes.
And in my mind, the new earth for me is peace.
Yes.
It's love. It's light. It's joy. And I'm not going to find peace and love and light and joy with a constant input of voices and noise and so on and so forth. Like I'm a podcaster, I want people to listen to the podcast. You're a podcaster, you want people to listen to the podcast. These are positive things that we're putting out into the world. So if you're having an experience where you feel like most of your days feel negative, look at the input. What are you inputting? If you're constantly dialed into the news, then you're putting a lot of negativity into the container of your life. If you're listening to positive programs like yours, then you're putting positive energy in. So anytime that I start feeling a dip in my frequency, a dip in my energy, I start looking at, okay, what has been the input?
Right.
And how can I shift my input? Because I am light and love.
Exactly.
I am a powerful, sovereign being of light and love. That's who I am at the core. Living a human experience, having human emotions, but emotions are energy in motion.
Exactly.
And so just like the energy of joy shifts and change, we have this experience and it's joyful, and then that fades. So do the negative experiences, so do the negative emotions. They come up and we can allow them to flow through, process, move forward. Or we can anchor those negative experiences, those negative emotions with a lot of negative input. These are things I haven't talked about before. Actually, in my channeling session this morning, I received this message about, sharing the process of awakening. Like we are all in the process of awakening. We
Yes.
are all in our own personal process of awakening. I had this miraculous experience in 2010 where I was a totally different person from one day to the next. But it's been a continuous process of awakening since then.
And I just want to emphasize what you're saying because we need to hear this now more than ever.
Hmm.
And I am a person that looks at the totality of things. And when you look at the totality of how we are evolving with the surroundings and circumstances around us, the distractions are there more than ever. You
Hmm.
cannot go to a, why do we need cameras at the grocery store showing us noise and movies? Why do we need them at the doctor's offices? Why do we need them at the gas station
At the
playing?
restaurants, we're
Yeah.
there to socialize and to be with people, and we've got screens
More.
everywhere. I was just at lunch with my mom yesterday, and there were screens all over the restaurant, and it was a sit down, order from a waiter restaurant, and here's all these screens. So yeah.
So I can't emphasize enough when you're having that drive, like you just said, take advantage of the peace and quiet. Turn the television off, turn the music off, turn the news off, turn it off sometimes. You know, go to that place, that beach, that water, listen to the ocean. Listen to the
Hmm.
natural things around you. Sense the wind. Take a breath. Take pause and let the noise around you be busy and go on to its own depths of where it goes. But to have that moment and feel like you're walking on the path in your pace, in your rhythm, in your path, aligned, even though the noise is happening around you. And I want to give people that visual because we can actually do it.
Yeah, we can.
Really, really can. I could talk to you for like hours.
For sure.
I'm
We could.
sure. At this point, we're coming up on an hour. I would love the right to reserve and have you back,
I would love
you
to.
know,
Yeah, that would be fun.
finish that conversation to hear more about your book. But meanwhile, until
There's
then,
another book coming because I need to tell the rest of the story. Like, how did, because in my first book, I mentioned angels once.
okay, okay. Will you save that story for us on part two of this podcast, and we'll call this part one?
Absolutely. That sounds great. Thank you
That's
so much.
fantastic. As people need to, how can they reach you? How can they get in contact with you? You're an excellent person for grief coaching and whatever else you want to talk about that you offer. Do you want to
Yeah.
share that?
Yeah, so I primarily offer mediumship or spirit guidance sessions, and you can find all that at juliecluff.com. And I also do like human design sessions or astrology sessions, but those are few and far between, but that's available. You can find me on YouTube. I have a podcast on YouTube at Julie Cluff Coaching. And I also do a channeled message, angel message every week. I post several angel messages every week, but I do a longer one on Sundays, and then I have a podcast that comes out on Wednesdays where I have conversations like this, which is fun. I'm on Instagram, on Facebook, but yeah, juliecluff.com is the best place to find all the stuff. And I have a couple courses there, one on spirit communication that you can get a hold of and learn more about, like your own clairs, your own senses, and how you can communicate with spirit. So
Yeah. So we're going to make sure that all of this information is also down in our description box for this particular podcast. But Julie, I just want to thank you. Thank you for taking pause, sharing your story, and thank you for affording us the opportunity to understand the tools and tips for the mediumship and to embrace our gifts and bring them forward and shining the light over the world with your story and your love. So
thank
thank
you
you
so much.
again for being here. And this has been another episode of The Infinite Way, where spirituality meets humanity. And if you know that this podcast episode will help someone, I'm going to ask you, please do forward it, share this information, and don't forget to like and subscribe us. And thank you for being here. And we're going to have Julie back on part 2. Thank you again. Take care, everybody.